this member of the rural that's where this member of the rural resilience subcommittee is actionable items as soon as we can. And because I just think this is going to continue to escalate. The humidity is sticking with us right through next Tuesday. So whenever there's humidity, which is pretty much all the time now, we're at risk for more water, which is what we've seen the last few days. And then, with that heat and humidity also comes the chance for severe weather too. So that's my quick weigh in. Thank you for those that can stay on, but I am going to jump off, and just saw 3 more of our crews drive by me while I was sitting here on the side of the road in St. Jay. So I want to catch up with them.
Yeah. Thank you for the work that you're doing and for chiming in to the point that you could today. And we will definitely follow up with the whole group. So good luck.
Okay.
Stay safe.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone.
Luck.
Thank you. So we are recording. This is a meeting of the Rural Resilience Subcommittee for the Climate Council. We are in the process right now of determining if we're going to carry forward with this meeting. We're close to a quorum, but how do folks feel about a quorum? I don't remember the actual rules on whether or not we can even hold a meeting, or if there's not any real formal decisions being made.
You can, if there are no decisions being made. So just up to you all, or up to us.
So does it behoove us to go through this and hope that people can catch up with a recording? A lot of what we have to cover today is more updates from the Vermont Climate Council. There are, then we're starting to jump into our task groups and the real work at hand. So what do folks feel? Should we just carry on with the meeting? It sounds like we'll have challenges rescheduling this anytime soon anyway. What do you guys think?
From my perspective, it would be great to get the background here with is coming down from the Vermont Climate Council. Maybe we don't have enough people to break into task groups, but it would be great to get a sense of how often they'll meet and how, things like that.
Yeah. All right. I say we go forward. Maybe it will be really super high level and brief, more brief than we had planned, but it'll be there for people to catch up on. We did send out some documents that are sort of, providing a framework or some guideposts and how to proceed. So maybe we're going to need to sort of push it onto the task groups to help ground people in the work. But we'll do our best here. Go ahead, Marion.
Sorry, Sue Plant, are you on the phone? I don't know whose number that is.
No,
because if not, then we don't have a note taker. It looks like all the EM folks are missing, which makes sense, but
yeah.
I
heard from all of them. I heard from Anne that she's helping doing some inventory. I heard from Allie that she's also helping in her community. And then, Sue said that she does the notes from the recording, so she can still do the notes after the fact. And I think Scott called in. Is that you, Scott, on the line? He said he was going to call in, but I don't know if it's a member of the public or Scott. Or Commissioner Levine, because he also was going to call in. Well, regardless, I guess we should just proceed. Is that all right with everybody? Thumbs up, nods. Okay, good.
It's a public meeting, could be anybody drop in.
Right. Sometimes it's hard when you're traveling to unmute and say who you are. So I have PowerPoint because it's just easier for me to facilitate a meeting with a PowerPoint. So I'm going to share my screen, I hope. See here. Looks like you all are seeing that.
Yes,
Okay, I just wanted to kick things off. Oh, we should actually make sure we're okay with the minutes before we get into this PowerPoint. The minutes from last meeting. I don't know, maybe actually we can't do that because we don't have a quorum. That might be one item that we can't follow up on. And we can put that off either, I guess, to the next meeting. Should we do that?
yeah, that's legitimate.
Okay.
If you feel
Um,
you need to post, you can post them as draft.
Yeah, we do have them posted.
Yeah.
And I did send them around a link to that for people to review, but we won't be able to approve them, I guess, until our next meeting. Yeah, thanks, Alice. Okay, and so yeah, we'll just jump in here. The agenda is the agenda, and these slides follow that. I just wanted to mention the work plan and trying to continue to work from that, especially as task groups get going, and so that we can have some consistency to the point possible. I have been updating the work plan as we go. So now it's not just the work plan, it provides a little bit of a background on the work and the way we formed and the charge of the subcommittee. There's a section on areas of focus for the council that came out of their in-person January meeting. So just sort of making sure that the group as a whole is aware of where the council wants to be, at least as according to that meeting. There's some links to relevant documents there. And then the work plan, broken out by each month and what we hope to achieve during those months. And then there's a task group framework, which is completely a draft right now, and just some ideas to be thrown out there that we can decide how we want to use that or continue or modify, just to provide, again, the group some consistency as we move forward and task groups do their work, sort of separately and then come together as a whole. It does sort of point to the fact that it would be nice to have a place to have like a central deposit for documents. And I know we have the resources page, but if people want to be able to access, I gave access to everyone to the work plan, but I think there needs to be a little bit more of a formal place. And I know cross-sector mitigation subcommittee is working on how to share documents. I think that's going to be even more important as the task groups get moving and how we can work on documents and then bring them forward to this committee in a public space to review and deliberate on as we need to. So I don't know, Marion, if you have any ideas or if we can just circle back to that through some coordination through the Climate Action Office to help us with that.
Yeah, I mean, if you're referring to sort of just task groups doing work, because a reminder, you can't have the whole subcommittee working on documents outside of a meeting that then is in conflict with open meeting law requirements. But if you're just talking about task groups, which should be groups of folks that are less than quorum, I would sort of leave it up to the task group leads and the folks in that group to figure out which space they want to work in. If there are state staff, perhaps they could help set up environments, or we could work in Google Docs, and then those would obviously, once those documents are coming back for review by the subcommittee, they get posted online. So for the last climate action plan, we do have a SharePoint site that was set up to provide access to folks through their partner email accounts. It worked better for some than others. I believe that's what cross sector is going to try and use, but yeah, that's kind of what the solution is we can set up a space in SharePoint, but folks have to use their partner email accounts to access it.
Okay, well, we'll get some more clarity on that as the task groups get going and correspond with the task leads about that. And then also just look to post the updated versions of the work plan within the documents of the meetings that we have for everyone on the calendar. So let's just proceed in that way, and we'll regroup as we need to. So I just wanted to go over some of the documents that have been coming out of that the whole Climate Council is looking at, and different subgroups, and the Climate Action Office has been drafting these and sharing them with the Climate Council to look at and review and sort of adopt. And one of those is some additional guidance for the subcommittee process. And basically, there's a link for that. We provided a link for that on the calendar invite. So if you haven't had a chance to look at that, please try to do that, especially as you break up into the task groups, because it sort of just lays it out in a little bit more detail, and I think in a pretty clear way what stages there are. So those 3 listed stages are there. And in each of those stages, they're basically have broken it into what's happening during those stages, what our subcommittee should be looking at, and consequently the task groups also, what support there is, and then how to incorporate just transition principles into the work that we're doing at those different stages. So that's, really high level review of that. I don't know if anybody that was at the Climate Council meeting has anything more to add. That was shared as a draft to the council at their Monday meeting this week. And I believe there was little comment on it. So I think, it's largely ready to go as is, and it will be adopted for us to use, and that we should be using it as we move forward on our work. If there's updates, we'll definitely share them, but pretty much how things are laid out. I found it helpful. It just sort of breaks things out in a good way to understand where we need to be. So did anybody have a chance to read through that, or does anybody have any questions on that at all? I can't see everybody, so if there are questions, let me know. All right. Well, definitely the task leads, I think it's a good thing to, keep revisiting as we continue our work and make sure that the groups that you're working with understand where north is along this path. And then one of the other documents that they are reviewing right now is the subcommittee prioritization framework. Again, it was shared as I believe as a draft to the council. I'm not sure, Marion, if you know if it's a draft or a final at this point. But they, it's there. It's again helpful as a reference point to kind of understand where we will go with the prioritization. That is definitely going to be more of a focus at our August and even our September meetings, but good to start looking at that. The prioritizations based on the criteria that's laid out in the Global Warming Solutions Act. So those 5 foundational criteria: equity, cost effectiveness, co-benefits, technical feasibility, and the impact of the actions. And then the framework for prioritization, that section of the document discusses an approach for the subcommittees to look at and to ultimately come to put forward from our subcommittee 2 or 3 actions that are our highest priority, going to what Michael is speaking about, like what do we really need to be working on to make a difference in what we're experiencing here, and how we can respond and recover from all these events, how we can adapt. So yeah, like I won't read the whole slide, but basically laying out those sort of steps towards the path of prioritization. And then criteria definitions goes into some detail about how subcommittees can be thinking about the ranking, high, medium, and low. It gives sort of a description of some of the criteria and the way the cross-sector mitigation and then the rural resilience and adaptation and ag and eco should be thinking about those, breaks it out for impact and breaks it out for cost effectiveness. And then the co-benefits is sort of the same guidance for all subcommittees, but just some clarity on maybe how we're thinking about that. And again, bringing consistency to the whole climate action plan, and then also what we're putting forward as from the task groups as a subcommittee to the council. Go ahead, Alice.
Okay, 2 questions, just so I'm clear. The framework for prioritization, that is, we'd be looking at top 10 or top 11 or whatever, and then order them in importance. So the top 3, 2 or 3 would be action items that we would feel are important to do now, like soon, or do they
Yeah, I
go
mean,
by?
I think we'll have to figure that out as a subcommittee, and I think that'll be more clear as the task groups come to us with the way that they're going to prioritize the actions that they have. But ultimately, yeah, what do we think as a subcommittee is the most important thing to address? Yeah.
And then
okay.
on criteria definitions, we're going to have maybe we could do a ranking on what the costs would be and what the overall cost benefit is.
Yeah, and I think we'll get into that a little bit more later in our discussion today.
Okay,
But it's something that I think we're going to have to try to work on and figure out how to, again, get that consistency amongst the task groups so that we're truly, as a subcommittee, providing the 2 to 3 top things that we want to do as a subcommittee. But yeah, those criteria definitions are all about the high, medium, and low rankings and how we're going to bring that forward. Marion, did you have more to add on that? I saw your hand.
No, I was just gonna Alice's first question, my interpretation of this was I think the goal of the council is to have an overall top 10 list, reflecting that the last plan, didn't really prioritize actions beyond that kind of high, medium, and low. And so the council was left with, 250 so actions. So I think the intent is that each subcommittee will bring forward 2 or 3 top actions once we've kind of worked to refine the actions. So that was, my interpretation, but you kind of covered it.
Yeah.
okay.
It's a big task to
Yeah.
really figure out what's most critical for us to put forward. All the other things will be there, but yeah, just to say what's most important to our group and recommend that to the council to decide on. Anything more on this? And again, we'll get more into the specifics of this definitely in our August and September meetings as we work along our path here. So also at the Climate Council meeting on Monday, they did an overview of climate action legislation. And this was sort of the list that they went through. I think specific to rural resilience, or most specific to rural resilience, are those 3 there. But there are other ones on this list that definitely have a resilience and adaptation nexus as well. So we're going to do a really quick speed round of the overview of these, but definitely encourage everybody and the task groups to become a little bit more familiar with what these are specifically. So S213 really is A&R working on this, but since we don't have anybody from DEC here, I'll give an overview of it. It's Act 121, the Flood Safety Act, and it has to do with rivers, dams, and wetlands. And so for the dam safety, basically it transfers jurisdiction over the safety of 21 electric generating dams from the Public Utility Commission to DEC. It creates an unsafe dam revolving loan fund for non-emergency repairs. There's call for 2 phases of dam safety rulemaking. And then there's some minor modifications for tactical basin planning, looking to support communities with resilience using nature-based solutions. So that's the dam part, very high level, obviously. And then rivers, it calls for towns to develop minimum flood standards for rulemaking. It expands regulation of land uses in river corridors. It calls for a national flood insurance program, flood hazard area study committee. And that committee is intended to produce results to unburden towns from flood hazard mitigation and to consider the transfer of enforcement responsibilities. And then when I talked to Rivers, they said this process will open up the Rivers general permit. So I just mentioned that because it could hold opportunities for changes in that general permit if it's deemed by people reviewing this, and as if we want to put forward any recommendations for that, there might be an opportunity there through the general permit. I mean, there's always the opportunity to change those types of things, but there may be an open process for that. And then for the wetlands, it requires a mapping update by January 1st, 2026, and mapping of high quality wetlands by January 1st, 2030. It requires A&R to submit legislative reports on wetlands permitting. They're already doing this for federal reporting. And then the big part is it includes a net gain goal requirement for mitigation for loss at a 2-to-1 ratio. And so they need to amend the wetland rules by July of 2025.
Yeah, when it goes virtual, we get a little character. Oh, nice. And I just want my generic Vermont shirt because I don't know who I work for anymore.
Yeah, and we can totally, yeah, okay, thanks. So yeah, they have to do rulemaking about that mitigation requirement by July 1st, 2025. And then there was a couple of other minor things that I'll leave out because we're supposed to be doing this quickly. S310, I don't know if there's anybody on the line that can speak to that. I can put in the chat both of the summaries for 213, and Stephanie did provide a summary of what she took from the session this year. I'm not going to read through it. Basically, S310 creates a community resilience and disaster mitigation fund for a municipal disaster mitigation, adaptation, and repair grant program, which is clearly needed. Oh, Carolyn, hi.
Hi, sorry, I was on 2 calls at once, so I'll just really quickly, it is sustainable funding for what was the Flood Resilient Communities Fund. So we expect that a lot of that work will be continued, but with a fewer strings attached to it. So we don't have to have that clean water benefit tied because of the ARPA funding. Now we can broaden the range of projects a little bit more, but it'll probably focus a lot on those buyouts that are not eligible for FEMA funding and those projects that just, didn't fall within the requirements of FEMA grants. So we are very excited to have that sustainable funding for the program. And so if you look at materials for Flood Resilient Communities Fund on our website, a lot of that is going to continue, just for everyone's awareness.
Great, thank you.
I'm gonna drop again, but thank you.
Oh, thanks. Marion, do you want to just do a quick overview of 259 for Make Big Oil Pay and the resilience connection?
Yeah, and I can put the link to it in the chat, but Make Big Oil Pay S259 in the session, or now known as 122, is a law that now establishes a climate superfund cost recovery program with the aim of securing payments for the damages caused by greenhouse gas emissions from responsible parties to provide a source of revenue for climate adaptation projects in the state. So at a really high level, this program charges A&R, the Climate Office specifically, with defining liability related to responsible parties, and responsible parties are defined as fossil fuel extractors who extract and emit on an emissions threshold above 1 million metric tons of CO2, and then proposes determining responsibility and liability based on their share of global emissions, and essentially sending cost letters to those companies to then require them to pay for damages they've caused to Vermont. So A&R is charged with sort of defining the share of liability and responsible parties, and then working closely with the Treasurer's office to actually determine the cost that climate change and greenhouse gas emissions specifically have had on Vermont. That cost calculation has to look at both damages from greenhouse gas emissions in the past and projecting forward future damages, as well as what the state has paid to adapt to climate change due to greenhouse gas emissions in the past and into the future. And so that's work that we're starting to do with the Treasurer's office. And we'll be looking at kind of rolling that out and issuing cost recovery demand letters by January 1st of 2027. And then ultimately the intent is to have receive payments from those responsible parties into a climate superfund cost recovery program that could then fund climate adaptation projects that could be defined either through the resilience implementation strategy we're working on, or through the program that Stephanie just mentioned, the Community Resilience and Disaster Mitigation Program, and the State Hazard Mitigation Plan. So essentially setting up a system to send bills to liable parties and fossil fuel extractors, and then to use those funds to pay for adaptation projects in the future. That's it.
Great, thank you. And then, Anne, are you able to just give a quick overview for 289 and any resilience related?
Yep, and I can cover S305 too a little bit.
Okay, yeah, great.
So H289, which is now Act 179, is the Renewable Energy Standard Reform Bill. So as such, it's really a lot of the impact is on the mitigation side. So it's about increasing the share of in-state renewables that utilities have to procure from 10% to 20% by either 2030 or 2035. And also all the utilities will need to get to 100% total renewables by 2030 or 2035. And then there's adds a new regional renewables category, which is generally, projects that are larger than 5 megawatts that can be located anywhere in the New England region, essentially. And those could even be offshore wind projects, but they're generally going to be sort of larger scale, and they could be located in Vermont, or they could be located outside of Vermont and just deliver electricity into the region that Vermont would benefit from. So again, so that's mitigation of greenhouse gases, but there is a, everything's related, right? So there are sort of resilience implications to keep in mind in terms of the increased in-state distributed generation or the larger regional renewables, which may be located in Vermont, which is, there's sort of a cost side of it. So, this is there are larger, higher costs to more renewables. And I think that's kind of, that is what it is. But as in the department, we're the energy planning office and the ratepayer advocate, right? So we think about both sides of increasing the share of renewables, but also trying to manage costs to make sure that they're manageable for consumers, ratepayers, all of us who pay our electric bills, who are going to keep paying for this generation, but we need to be able to make sure that people can afford to also electrify, so that electricity is a more compelling fuel in terms of cost for people that may need, who are cost sensitive or may need that economic proposition to electrify heating and transportation, which is where most of our emissions in the energy sector come from. There's also an implication on the landscape. We are going to be needing to site a lot more renewables in Vermont than we've heretofore cited, and the pace will increase as well. And there are trade-offs in terms of the resilience of the landscape for other needs, either for food resilience or for carbon sink functions of forests, or housing resilience, for example, needing to potentially move housing, or where we're building housing. So I think that's just one of the areas where it's going to be important for us to think holistically about the use of our landscape and the trade-offs for different types of to meet different types of human needs. So can get into any of that more, but that's sort of the H289 side of things. The department also has to run a process this fall to come up with a report for a replacement of group net metering. The H289, Act 179, did changed a lot of things about the group net metering structure and put some constraints on it. Really requires after this year that group net metering or virtual net metering projects are cited on the site of the beneficiary of that project or on the adjacent parcel. Sort of low-income housing gets sort of an extra year to take advantage of that program. But then the idea is that there will be a replacement sort of community solar community renewable program that would achieve some economies of scale. So it would be sort of more affordable than net metering has been to date, but also have a lot of the attributes that we're looking for in terms of making optimal use of the grid or optimal use of the landscape, being consistent with some of the regional and local energy planning, that type of thing, to support sort of that community participation in the renewable future. S305 is mostly a housekeeping bill, but it does touch on energy storage to some extent. Energy storage is part of the state permitting regime, but this makes some clarifications to that structure. And I just also in that vein wanted to mention there's an energy storage rulemaking that the commission has been doing for a few years now. It really sets the rules of the road on storage installations and siting, and in particular, safety codes and standards, fire safety, that sort of thing, as well as decommissioning, making sure there's a end of life plan for recycling of energy storage systems. So that rulemaking, the commission has put out a draft rule, and comments on that draft rule are due I think a week from today. If anyone is interested in taking a look at that, I can point you toward the docket. I think that's it.
Great, thank you. I don't think Bronwyn is on. Is that accurate?
Yeah, she sent an email
Okay.
that she wasn't able to join, and I think sent an update. But
Okay. I don't have that right in front of me. She was going to talk a little bit about H687 and the Act 250 reform and how that relates. But maybe
I can pull it up if you just give me a second.
Oh, that would be great. I'm sure it's pretty high level, but there was a lot in there. But we asked her to just speak to sort of what relates to resilience and in our work here.
Hold on, let me.
Okay, thank you.
Oh,
In the meantime, are there any questions on any of the ones that we've gone over so far?
Okay, I can read what Bronwyn sent. Sorry, I haven't looked at this yet. So let's see. So Act 181, is that what we're talking about? Act relating to community resilience and biodiversity protection. 687, let's see. She said the law makes major changes around land use and planning regulatory framework to strengthen place-based regulatory recognition and investments guided by regional planning and municipal action. It creates a policy platform to better support areas for planned growth, areas for rural and working lands, and areas for conservation. Also makes revisions to the Planning Act goals to include environmental justice principles and focus economic and residential development to meet housing targets within regionally mapped areas for planned growth. It also includes new regional plan requirements to include equity, climate resilience, mitigation, and adaptation to the purposes of regional plans. All right, just skimming to see if she shared anything else here. Also creates a municipal and regional planning grants and resilience fund. So it takes the municipal planning grant fund and sort of adds resilience into that to allow municipal planning grants for flood protection and climate resilience, and then just really codifies resilience in the name of the fund. Also changed the downtown and village tax credit program, making changes to support flood resilient building improvements, improves newly eligible credits now include elevating building utilities above flood levels, including areas outside of FEMA mapped areas that have experienced flooding. It increases the general code and flood mitigation credits to $100,000, which was previously capped at $50,000. And sorry, a couple more things here. In the rental data collection and privacy section, it adds disclosures related to naming organizations for the purposes of emergency management and the state's housing needs assessment. Also requires a disclosure to buyers, home buyers during conveyance of whether properties are subject to any requirements under federal law to obtain and maintain flood insurance, and further requires landlords to disclose whether a rental is in a FEMA-mapped flood hazard area. And then related to flood disclosure on mobile home lots, leases, and sales, it adds a requirement in mobile home leases, lot leases to disclose if the mobile home park is in a flood hazard area, and requires sellers of those homes to disclose flood history and damage. And let's see, the last one here, related to flood impacted new construction and rehabilitation. The act establishes authority for the voters of a municipality to authorize a new property tax exemption for a period of 3 years from occupancy for the increased appraisal value of qualified improvements to qualified properties or principal residences affected by the federal disaster declaration of last year. So from July 1st, 2023 to October 15th, 2023. And I believe that was it.
Yeah. Okay. So actually a lot more in that than I realized to do with resilience, and my little bracket really should be expanded to this whole list. So we just wanted to really, point those out. It was a big year, big session for environmental policy and legislation that came out of that. So there's a lot to consider as we move forward with our work, and we should definitely be checking in on those bills and acts as we move forward to see how they overlap with what we're doing. So, okay, let's move on. Maybe. Another thing that was talked about at the Climate Council meeting on Monday was the feedback that was received after the Climate Action Office public engagement kickoff event. And Marion, are you able to speak to that? I know in our group, or the Thursday session, you took notes for the rural resilience meeting, and just hoping that you could provide an overview of what we heard back. This is what's, I also provided an email to you all this morning from the Climate Action Office with a little bit more detail about what was heard at those events. So definitely dig into that as well. But high level, this is what was specific to rural resilience.
Sorry, wasn't totally prepared to do this, but happy to read the slide. Yeah, so for folks who weren't there, there were breakout sessions held for each of the 3 subcommittees that are developing specific actions and recommendations for the Climate Action Plan. So one that focused on rural resilience. Obviously, you can see on the slide here, there was a lot of discussion around communication, and specifically around accessible communication, and ensure that communication that is shared out about hazards and vulnerabilities and emergency response as well is accessible to Vermonters who either English isn't their first language or need other accessibility changes to get that information. So there was a lot of discussion on that in one of the breakout groups. There were obviously a lot of discussion around how do we sort of build community support around resilience and adaptation measures. How do we kind of build community capital and support community mutual aid and other structures that are sort of informal, but really provide resilience to neighborhoods and communities on the ground when a disaster hits. It was noted that there are certainly differences in rural and more urban and more developed areas that will require different approaches to how we think about resilience and adaptation. Energy resilience was part of the discussion there, obviously. And if you looked at what Andrea shared before this meeting, which has a bit more detail and also includes some of the survey responses that was shared after this event, there's quite a few responses around energy resilience that was grouped in the rural resilience section. Discussion around sort of planning support and support for municipal governments and organizations at a regional and state level, so that, or a local, regional, and then supported at the state level, so that sort of project implementation can be moved a little bit more quickly. I think this is something Mike was sort of getting at too in his comments at the beginning of the meeting. Reiteration that public health focus should be part of this plan. And then a focus too on other acute and chronic disasters such as heat emergencies that we experience in addition to flooding. Sorry, kind of just read the slide, but I hope that was helpful.
No, that was great. Thank you. And apologies for putting you on the spot there. Appreciate it. I did want to also provide space for, there's another link here for another document that was shared with the Climate Council on Monday, the best practices for public comment. It was a draft document from Just Transitions. And I didn't know, I did not to put somebody else on the spot, but Paula, or I don't know if there's anybody else here from Just Transitions that wants to give like just a high level overview of what that is, or if you're not prepared to, then that's okay. And we can just look at it on our own, but.
Yeah, I don't know if my audio is working yet.
It's working, but you are very quiet still.
I messed with my settings and it doesn't seem to help. Okay.
Yeah.
Do you
Can
have
folks hear her okay enough if we really lean in? Is it gonna work?
All right. Is there no one else from JTSC here?
You actually sound okay to me right now. So if you
Great. I'm shouting into my computer microphone.
thank you.
Great. Yeah, so I think I have this open still from the Climate Council meeting. Let me just go grab that. Do you have it in your slides by any chance?
I might actually have it open. Let me see if I can find it. I got a million things open here. What do we got? No, that's not it.
I put it in the chat, Andrea, if that's helpful.
Okay, that is helpful. I can find it. Sorry,
Yeah,
I
I
am.
think the biggest takeaway from this is that in order to really be accountable to the public when we are deliberating and voting and reaching consensus, that the goal is to hear public comment during deliberation and decision making, rather than going through the whole thing, deliberating, commenting to each other, making a decision, and then having public comment after. I know that sounds really obvious, but it's not the way things generally work at public meetings, and that's not like unique to the council or unique to Vermont or even unique to the US. It's just kind of like the way the process typically works in a sort of business focused meeting. So that's kind of what I would say is the biggest takeaway. During the Climate Council meeting, the only substantive change that came up, so right now the document is, it kind of suggests that you do the public comment before you deliberate. And there was just some thought that it would be more like before you make a final decision, so that, you know, the flow of the meeting or the conversation can be a little more flexible, depending on, you know, who's there, the comments that they make, and things like that. Also, it's possible that we'll receive, that the CAO or another you know, body or person will receive written comments that are germane to deliberations and votes. And so those would be shared probably before deliberations begin, as part of the sort of setup for decision making. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot here, but really that's really what it comes down to. That our goal is to listen to members of the public and be accountable to them, and so that they actually can see the results of, you know, in real time. And this is, just want to make sure that people understand, this is just what's happening in the meetings themselves. And then there's also all this other community engagement, public engagement, much of it focused on the most kind of like vulnerable communities, where our contractor CBI is going around and just like going to events, staging events, tabling at you know, community fairs and things like that, just to make sure that they're getting some really good kind of like more spontaneous feedback that is then being shared back to the council as well. But at the subcommittee level, the expectation is more that we're going to be hearing germane public comment during our meetings. So yeah, it's just kind of like reversing that order. So it's clear that listening to the public is part of how we need to make the decisions that we're making.
Yeah, thanks, Paula. I appreciate that. Yeah, that's what I certainly took away from it too, is to provide more space, more opportunity, not just necessarily one time, but after each topic of substance, to see what the public has to say about that before we deliberate on it as a subcommittee, so that we can consider that. And then also, as part of that, just engaging directly during the public meeting. And of course, David and I will have to facilitate the way that goes, but just encouraging that. I think in the past, it's sort of just been, receive public comment, thank you, it's noted, and the guidance is to be more interactive on that. So again, like Paula said, people understand that they're being heard and where we stand on that, and that their input is being considered. Any questions on that? Okay, so part of the survey that we had, and part of, Paula just mentioned the Climate Action Office doing engagement in a number of different ways, and they wanted our input on what questions or what kinds of things, or how we should be talking to people on topics that we care about and we need input on. And so that was part of the survey that we sent out. And these are really high level results, and Otis was kind enough to kind of go through all of those, because thank you for the input that you provided. There was a lot of input and a lot of great suggestions, but they sort of lumped into some themes. And so Otis was going to give an overview of that.
Yeah, so Andrea gave a good introduction to it. We got some really good suggestions for questions from everyone. So thank you all for taking the time to really put some thought into those. And yeah, I went through and saw some themes, sort of picked out these 4 general groups that the questions seemed to fall into. And then within those, these were sort of the sub themes that I identified, at least. So saw definitely a through line. Oh yeah, sorry. Of questions around, what are existing resources and what is the need for additional resources. There are a lot of questions asking people about their experiences for what is needed to do sort of resilience work. There was, of course, a number of questions around equity and inclusion, both as far as how sort of what we were just talking about in the last slide, is how is outreach being conducted so far, and how can we do a better job at our outreach, and then also asking a few questions around who's being impacted disproportionately, I suppose, by these events. Sort of related to that was there are several around impacts, or what I was calling at least impacts and adaptations. That was sort of a combination of questions that were around what impacts are people already seeing in their communities. Like, people have a lot to say about that given the last couple of days in certain areas. But then also, sort of leading off from that, a number of people also wanted to know what actions people individually and as communities were already taking to respond to climate impacts. There are a number of questions around that. And then finally, sort of another area that we're focused on as a subcommittee, there are a number of questions around energy resilience in particular. And so that sort of fell into 2 categories. One of, similarly asking what are individuals and communities doing to, switch to renewable energy? What are sort of the barriers to accomplishing that? And then the other sort of theme I pulled out was what are people's experience of the reliability of electrical service, especially as we look to electrify more things, and then also sort of what kind of costs are people willing to bear to improve for that reliability, was kind of another theme. So my sense is the next step for this, and I know we've talked about whether a task group is sort of tasked with doing that, or if sort of the co-chairs and some others try to take all this and condense it even further into sort of a handful of questions that we share with the Climate Action Office for them to get out and or to work with them then to package these up as questions that we include in some kind of public engagement, whether those are events or I think there are details there to be worked out. But that's I think what the next step is from here on these. And so we also wanted to ask if people and then I'll be done and pass it along. But if I missed anything, if people submitted questions that they're not seeing captured here, if I'm not, reading things the way people intended them to be, or if there are any gaps that we're not covering, understanding, of course, that I think we have some fairly limited, we can't put out 60 questions, unfortunately. So trying to capture everything we can sort of as concisely as possible, but definitely wanted to get this in front of everyone and make sure headed in the right direction on.
Thanks, Otis. Does anybody have any questions or comments or want to add anything that they think is really important that that we do get back to the Climate Action Office with so that they can do effective outreach on our behalf? And I don't, if anybody has their hand raised, then just speak out because I can't see it. And then I guess what we want to hear from you that Otis mentioned is, I think there was probably, I don't even know how many, 60 or more questions that were posed that Otis condensed. Do we want to have a small group, or is there a group that is willing to volunteer and sort of condense those into questions to forward on? And if not, then, David and I can work on doing that. But Candace, go ahead. Please.
Yeah, I just wanted to connect kind of this opportunity with a previous slide around how people said that they really needed more direct communication and clear communication and communication that might work for people to be more accessible. So I would be curious to add some sort of question in this next round of outreach about like what, like how do we get the word out to our rural communities? What kind of outreach or communication techniques are like work for you, that kind of thing. I think it's a real crucial issue for our rural communities that have kind of fewer outlets for that.
Otis, I'll let you speak to that if there was anything that was in there already for that, or we can certainly
Yeah,
that.
Yeah, no, I don't know, Candace, if this was something you submitted or if we saw it a couple times. Yeah, is that there were definitely questions in there around asking people, how are you currently getting information? What's the best way for us to share information out to your community? So yeah, I definitely saw those questions in there, and that's the sort of hoping to cover that with the improvements to stakeholder engagement bullet is sort of where that falls there. But yeah, definitely as we sort of figure out what to forward along, want to include something like that. I saw that a few times. Definitely a couple of people putting in questions around that theme.
So do we feel comfortable in having maybe one or two people work towards getting those questions to the Climate Action Office on behalf of the whole subcommittee? And if so, is anybody willing to step up and do that? I would say in the next week or so, we should just try to get back to them.
Not to put you on the spot, Anne, but I think I saw you volunteer in the chat.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to work with anyone else doing it, but maybe with Otis, you seem like you have a little familiarity with the questions so far. So I don't know, we could work together or anyone else could join, but yeah, happy to help out.
Yeah,
Okay.
Since I've already spent some time with these, I'm more than happy to work with whoever wants to volunteer.
Okay, sorry. No, go ahead.
Just curious if we have a goal for a number of questions or parameters there.
I'll put that out to the group too. Yeah. I would think like 5 or so, 5 or less is kind of where I'm thinking, but I don't know if anybody has a different thought on that. And then I guess I just want to check in on process if we all, well, we don't actually have a quorum today either, but process wise, are we okay to just go ahead and forward these, or do we have to deliberate on questions that go forward? I don't know if anybody can answer that right now, or if that's something I'll have to check in on.
I don't think we have to, I mean, if we as a subcommittee feel okay, just having Otis and Ann and whoever else work on questions, I don't think we have to come back and formally approve them.
Thank you. That would be great. Thank you both for working on that. Appreciate it. Okay, so any questions or comments as we kind of move into our task groups, or on anything that you've heard before we move into the task groups? And I am not monitoring the chat either, so if somebody can help do that too, that'd be great.
Not seeing anything else in the chat.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Otis, for that overview. So in the survey, we asked for everybody to provide a first and second choice on which task group they would be most interested in contributing to. And we were not able to give everybody their first choice. Infrastructure in the built environment was definitely the most popular place to want to be. And we had to kind of shuffle other people around. This is where it landed. We did not hear from a couple of people, and so I'll continue to reach out to them to make sure that they have a role in the task groups as well. Basically, this is the breakdown, and the folks in green, I think, to the best of my knowledge, are the state staff, and then that black print is the non-state staff. I just kind of wanted to try to get a mix there, and that was the best we could come up with. But happy to take input on that right now if something doesn't look right to you, or if you want to follow up with me, you can also do that. And the people that are listed at the top in bold are those who said that they were willing to lead a task group and had the capacity to do so. So definitely appreciative of them stepping up to do that. Yeah, I'm happy to work with those folks too, especially on a task group that I'm on, but you'll definitely need support from your group. So make sure that you're not carrying too much of a load, but I appreciate you stepping up to be able to do that. All right, so, you know, we talked about the additional guidance and the original guidance, and, you know, we have our work plan, and hopefully these bullet points pretty much align with that. Just wanted to provide some expectations for proceeding with the task groups. And really in the month of July, not necessarily by the meeting, of course, but during the month of July, what we want to do is to sort of continue to refine the gaps and look at the pathways, the strategies and actions that could be removed, need revision, or ones that need to be added, and then really thinking about what we need to understand the gaps and to start thinking about how to fill those gaps. So thinking about the resources that we can reference and the data needs that we have, and hearing from key stakeholders, and then moving into August, you know, meeting with those stakeholders and starting to conceptualize what those revisions might entail, and sort of bringing those forward to the subcommittee in the August meeting. Definitely a large part of our August meeting will be getting an update from the task groups. And then in September, moving on to finalizing those modifications that we made, whether it be for pathway strategies or actions, and then working to prioritize those. So any questions on that time frame or the expectations? I think somebody mentioned earlier in the meeting, like what is the expectation? I think Val, it was you that sort of said, what's the expectation for meeting? And I think, cross sector is a little bit ahead of this on this path, because they already had task groups from the last climate action plan and a lot of the same members. So they have been meeting. Some of them have been meeting weekly and some of them have been meeting bi-weekly. So I think that's going to be sort of up to the task leads and the groups as a whole to figure out how they can proceed and how they want to proceed. But Alice, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I just want to make sure I understand that there really isn't any public health information or public health part in the climate action plan right now.
I think that's something to dig into. I can't speak to that.
Yeah.
But we identified that as a gap. The Climate Council said there needs to be more on it when they met in January. We heard that from the public engagement. So if there's anything, it's not prevalent enough and is a need. So
I got you. Okay, because it really did bubble up very quickly in working on our municipal local hazard mitigation plan, public health and emergencies that would cause, would happen in that area. That rose very high on our rankings very quickly from the last local hazard mitigation plan. And it just had a lot to do with climate change. Like getting caught with your pants down for the last heat wave that we had, things like that. So, okay.
Yeah, and I think we've touched the surface a little bit on public health and what that means. And so I'm sure the task group will dig into that, but physical health is a definite part of that, but mental health also being a part of that and the impacts that people are experiencing. Go ahead, David.
Yeah, the last time when the first climate action plan was put together, the health department did not have a health action plan. They do now, and that obviously ought to be something we hear about and consider incorporating.
Thanks, David.
Yeah, I agree with that, David. We can start there.
Yeah, and the health department is a member of the council.
Right.
So we can ask for their expertise.
Yep, and this subcommittee, both Commissioner Levine and then Jared. So both being on that task group.
Yeah, I'm actually online. I'll be transitioning from the car to the Zoom, but as I told Andrea this morning, I came from the governor's press conference regarding the flood response. So the topics that certainly I was charged with raising were mental health and resilience with such repetitive events, often in the same communities, safety of food and water, need for testing of drinking water due to flooding, especially if you're on wells, mold and mitigation regarding that post-flood. The topics go on, and then a heat wave coming over the weekend, but stay out of the water because it's not safe to go into these waters yet, et cetera, et cetera. So we do hope to bring that dimension to the council. Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think it's also on, I think it's Becca Bellant's webpage for climate impacts and some of the initiatives that their office is undertaking too. So be interesting to reference that. Okay, so the next slide I had here is just sort of trying to get a little bit more into the organization and the nitty-gritty of how the task groups will proceed and making the recommendations. And this is just my sort of brainstorm, trying to reference some of the guidance documents that have come out. So I'm just putting it out there for folks to consider. I think a good way to start is sort of grounding and reviewing some of the initial climate action plan. Obviously, we're going to be looking at the strategies tables and the language in it, but even looking at the section called using the plan right at the beginning that talks about sort of defines what a pathway is, what a strategy is, and what an action is, and goes into those 5 criteria that we talked about before that will go towards our prioritization. So just sort of grounding ourselves in sort of the basics. There's a whole beginning part on climate that Leslie Ann and Jay Schaefer wrote, and social cost of carbon. So all that sort of introductory stuff to the climate action plan, I think it would be very good to review again and understand sort of where we're working from and where we're going. Then, you know, our focus for this month is definitely refining the gaps. So I would suggest looking at, from a task group perspective, looking at which of the ones that the actions that exist now, where they fall, which ones are most related to the task group. For some, that might be less than others because of public health is new, but and looking at the progress report that was provided and understanding where we are with those actions. And then at a real high level, right from that, identifying what should be left alone and what might need to be modified and the new ones that we might need to create. And then moving into the gap filling actions, identify and review the related resources that we have, the state plans that exist, the literature that's out there, legislation that was passed in more detail. We gave the high level today, thinking about what data we need to have our hands on to make good recommendations. Hearing from the lead implementers and understanding what has been done and what is in place, and what challenges and opportunities we have to provide recommendations to provide more capacity, whether it's at the state level or the local level. So, and then of course, you know, as we move into September, referencing that prioritization framework and working towards the prioritization part of that being cross-referencing our task groups actions, as well as coordinating and speaking to the other subcommittees. I think both cross-sector mitigation and ag and eco will have some crossover on some of the actions that we can come up with. So trying to coordinate with them as we prioritize those actions. That's just, I'll just throw that out there and allow people to sort of provide input or react to that. You know, recognizing that this is sort of the initial thinking on how we will break into task groups and how we'll work together as those task groups and try to be consistent and bring work forward. I have, you know, an example of potential way that we can start to have some consistency amongst the task groups. And this is really just throwing it out there. So I just put it out there as a potential, and then again ask, is there a smaller group that would be willing? Maybe it's the task leads, maybe it's other people who feel like they have a really good mindset for this and vision for how we might approach this work. I know there's been some ideas thrown around in emails of how we should focus and what we should be thinking about as we move forward on this work. We have a similar thing going with the task group that I'm on for cross-sector mitigation, looking at the progress report and thinking about what funding exists, what's the legislation related to this, what information are we gathering, who do we need to hear from to make our informed decisions and recommendations as we move forward. So this is just a draft, and I guess I'm putting it out there to see if there's other people who want to contribute to that. Go ahead, Marianne, please.
I'm not a task lead, but I'm happy to, if the 3 task leads want to meet kind of short term to come up with, as you said, some sort of document or process for how the task groups can go about doing this in somewhat of a coordinated fashion, I'm happy to help support that.
That would
So
be excellent.
Yeah.
Appreciate that.
I don't know if Scott's on, but Val and Alice, how you all feel about that?
That would work for me. I'd take you up on that.
Yes, me too.
I can schedule something. Sounds good.
Okay.
Scott's usually very willing to pitch in, so I imagine he would be on board with that too. So that's great. He had some ideas too, so that would be wonderful. This table or something similar is in the work plan. Take it, leave it. We'll update the work plan if we deem that's the best place to keep it as a template as you guys finalize whether it's a table or bulleted process or whatever it is that you think is most useful and valuable to move forward. Go ahead, Marianne.
Can you remind me of time frame? I'm assuming this has to happen soon, but in relation to what you're looking for from the task groups ahead of, I guess, the August subcommittee meeting, what time?
Yeah.
Task groups in general.
I mean, I don't think, I guess I'll leave that up to the task group leads too. Looking at, we have a meeting in August on the 9th, so we're not expecting like completely revised new recommendations by then. I think that would be impossible to really have ironed out by then, given a lot of people in this group are going to be pretty busy in the next few months even. But I think, in the next couple of weeks, if you could have like a draft or, you are the task leads. So whatever you feel comfortable. I think just having something or even you all meeting to talk about it and move forward, at least all the task groups would be sort of on the same page of how you're proceeding. So I guess I would probably leave that up to you all to figure out what you can get done in what time frame and how valuable it is to have done in 2 weeks or a month or whatever. I would kind of lean towards sooner than later, but I don't know what that sooner is. Like 2 weeks, is that reasonable?
What I think I would do or suggest is to have the leads facilitated by Marion. I'd like to have that meeting first. And then get immediately, like right after that, get the full public health committee together. And Jared, I'm wondering how quickly you could get us the health department summary actions that you mentioned. There are 4 public health emergencies.
Yeah, I guess I'm not exactly sure what was being referred to. I mean, there's certainly guidance materials that we can share in different forms. I don't think there's anything quite as neat and packaged. But I'm happy to gather what I can and share with the group.
Yeah, that would be helpful. And if it's up on the website, just send us all links so we know where to find it.
Sure, yeah, I'm happy to do that.
Great.
I think that's a great suggestion, Alice, is to sort of try to get this nailed down a little bit more before you have task group meetings, but start to get those on the calendar. Anything more on that right now? Any input? Maybe we'll have some, yeah, we'll hear from you at our next meeting of what that framework looks like and how the task groups will be proceeding. And the only other thing I had a slide for was if we had time, and we do, to think about right now if we want to, and I'll leave it up to you if you want to, or if you want to end this meeting early, whether or not we want to talk about stakeholders and data needs, do a brainstorm session on that right now. What resources might be available, what we should be looking at, who we should be hearing from. If folks feel like that would be valuable with the group that we have, we can spend our time doing that, or we can also adjourn after we have a public meeting, a public comment opportunity.
I'm wondering if that might be a better conversation to have once the task groups have met, just because like I'm on the one for community capacity and planning, and it's, I don't know, it's still pretty broad. And so I wonder if the task groups maybe should meet first before we kind of dive into what, I mean, there's certainly folks we could want to hear from, but I think the relevancy to what we're trying to update should be discussed first.
I think that makes sense, and especially since we have a pretty slim group here today too, and it'd be more valuable to have more input on that. So I think that's fine. Is there anybody on from the public that has any comments about what we've discussed today? Still not quite sure who the 277 number is, but. Okay. Hearing none. I'm going to stop sharing. I think, yes. So maybe we can just spend a couple of minutes talking about our next steps. And I think that is Otis and Anne working together to summarize our public engagement input and feedback to Sophie at the Climate Action Office, hopefully within the next week or so. And then also Marion and Val and Alice and potentially Scott meeting sometime soon to work on the framework for the task groups. And then task leads starting to schedule our groups for meeting sometime soon, and potentially having at least one meeting, if not more, before our next meeting, but getting in what you can. Anything else? We'll carry forward our approval of the meeting minutes from June to August. And I guess that's it. All right, thanks everybody for attending and providing input and volunteering to carry forward the work and providing input on the survey. It's been good, and now we start to really dig in. Got a lot of work ahead of us, but it'll be good. I am not going to be able to attend the August meeting, but David will facilitate that. And we will see you then, and a bunch of you on task groups before then. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Andrea. Thanks all.